It's a phrase that pays. Thank. Yeah, buddy. You know what this is. You know what this means. If it's JN, Steve, and Mike, that means it's Wednesday. It means it's 8 p.m. EST. It's pinch me, I must be dreaming time. And in Mike's case, it's also clobbering time. Get him, Mike. It's clobbering time. Guys, welcome back to Pencil to Pencil, your favorite live chat betwixt expert cartoonists that happens every live Wednesday on your video scope. Let's do some introductions, you guys. I'm your first host. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. Yet there's too much daredevil going on, but I am yet a humble spice dealer. That's my Wilson Fisk. That's my Wilson Fisk invitation. I'm on the board of the National Cartoonist Society and also the Philadelphia chapter chair. Go Birds! On top of all that, I'm also a graphic novelist. Leon, Worst Friends Forever is my new volume out in stores from Scholastic underneath the graphics in print. Cop it, why don't you? Guys, that's a lot. But you know what's not a lot? My co-host, cohort, and co-conspirator, he is the Bill Bixby of web comics, so you would not like him if he is angry, I know, because he's such a sweet guy. That's why Stone Cold is so funny, right? Because it's like, you don't like you've never seen him.
I don't get that reference.
Okay, well,
I'm too young. I'm too young to get any of these references.
It's too meta. It's too fourth wall. You have no idea what we're talking about. Guys, walking down the side of the road of the internet superhighway is your friend and mine, the Bill Bixby of webcomics, Stone Cold Steve Conley. What up, Steve Conley?
Gentlemen, so good to see you. My name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age. I read the graphic novel Leon the Extraordinary. It's fantastic. You can find The Middle Age over on Webtoons, Tapas, Go Comics, my own website. I'm a card-carrying member of the National Cartoonist Society.
Hey, yo.
And I would be remiss. I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the Tower of Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the terror of the Yancey Street Gang, Mr. Mike Manley.
Good evening, ladies and joins, and all the ships at sea.
Mike
Manley, and I've drawn your childhood.
That's been happening a lot, hasn't it, Mike?
For the last several years, yeah. I've been drawing. People are coming up and realizing, like, oh, I know your lines. I've seen those before.
That's great. And does that ever get old? Like, I know, especially because, you know, you've been doing this for a minute, as the kids say. But still, like, every day you get up, you get your coffee, you sit down in a chair. But does it ever kind of, beyond people asking you or telling you that at a show or something, does it ever really kind of connect to you that your artwork has touched every edge of the globe? Like, that's got to be pretty cool to think about. I don't know if you think about it in those terms.
It's, you know, I know that especially with the strips are printed all over the world, especially the Phantom. But no, I mean, you don't really think about it because you're just, you know, it's like you're sitting here, you got your daily deadlines and things like that. So no, it's only when I'm only in context to somebody bringing something up or having some discussion on social media, because I tend to post a lot of stuff. I'm always posting old stuff and new stuff. But I mean, it's just sort of like a fact of life in a way. I mean, if you do anything for long enough, you know, especially something like this, like comics, especially comic strips, you know, people all over the world will eventually see it. But that's not something you don't really think. I don't really think about, you know. I really daily I'm just dealing with my tasks and things that I have to do or I want to do, or the continual dissatisfaction with everything that I do.
Well,
40 years of dissatisfaction.
Yes, Steve.
Do you feel that, Mike? Do you still feel that? Because I feel like you have so much of this locked down.
Yeah, I mean, if I mean, I have my art gods, right? and
JAMAR Nicholas.
JAMAR Nicholas.
JAMAR Nicholas.
Yeah, and so I have the things that I aspire to, and I will never get there. That's just the way it is. You know, it's like there's no such thing as perfection, you know, and I often feel that I was born 80 years too late or 100 years too late to do what I really wanted to do.
Die of tuberculosis.
The die of tuberculosis, my huckleberry. But yeah, the things that I really love the most, it's too late. Right. But and there's still stuff being done that I like, but the stuff that I love is not done anymore, and not done in the way, you know, the aesthetics, things like that. So, you know, but yeah, I'm always comparing myself, you know, well, you know, that could be better. You know, it's, I think if you think like you've got it all down, then that's basically an artistic death, because then you will start to immediately get old man drawing. You will start to suck. You will not be able to be honest with yourself. And there's a lot of people that are that way, you know. I mean, I know I'm good, and I know I'm competent, and I have confidence. I mean, how could I not after, you know, all this time? But no, I'm always, you know, I might sit down today when I'm having lunch and pull out some Mobius or Kirby or, you know, some artists I love, and I'm like, damn, you know, I really wish I could do something like that, but you can't. You know, you can't.
Do you find when you look at Mobius at lunchtime that when you get back at the art table, your work is a little more Mobius than it was before lunch?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think that's always been something. I'm sort of like a silly putty, you know. If you lay me down on it, you pull up, and you can like stick it down on the page. I think I've always been that way. I've always been sort of very like a mimic in a way, since I was a kid. And I think it's because I like so many different things with, you know, comics and animation. But yeah, you know, I'm always dissatisfied. You know, I might be satisfied for the moment, and then when I look at the stuff when it's in the paper and the comic, oh man, I should have. That hand sucks. That figure should be better. I done this from another angle. You know, I mean, I don't think you can ever be. You must always be hungry, and I don't think you can ever be satisfied. And part of it is that, you know, with commercial art, you have deadlines. So it's like tonight, whether I like them or not, whether I would rather, you know, take a magnet and erase my hard drive, I have to turn in my strips. Right. Right. There's the tyranny of the deadline that is above all, whether you like it or not. You know, whether you go like, wow, I'm really happy with this panel, but this one, you know,
right? You don't have the space to like rip it up.
You have up days, you have down days, you have weeks that are more fun to draw. There's weeks less fun to draw. There's things that are more fun to draw. There's, you know, people sitting at a table talking is never fun to draw.
Well,
it's difficult, and you want to do it well, and you don't want them to look like misshapen mutants, and the hands holding the glass look all terrible or anything. And all the people that I admire can do that and do it well. But, you know, part of telling the story is, you know, it's not always explosions and stuff like that. So, you know, it's, you know, sometimes you're happy because you did a really nice hand holding a glass.
Yeah, and that's
100%.
An old chestnut is, you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both. Now there you have comics. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's very poignant.
I mean, it's hard. I know it's hard for the amateur or the aspiring artist or the fan to relate to it in that way, because when you draw something and they see you draw something, it goes like, oh, it's just bling, it's magic or whatever, but they don't know what's inside,
Right.
and they also don't see all the long chain that's attached to that,
Mm-hmm.
But one thing about the good thing about the strips is if I draw something today that I don't like, I have a chance tomorrow to try to draw something that I do like. I have a chance to improve. I have a chance to get better at drawing a 3/4 back view of somebody yelling,
Right.
Mm-hmm. I like that. So what I also like about tonight is that we have a fantastic guest on tonight who, you know what, all roads lead back to Philadelphia. I know you guys who are in Philly hate to hear me talk about this, but
ew,
Philly. Philadelphia is such a rich ore of cartooning. What do we say, Steve? That's lousy with cartoonists.
Did you say it's a rich whore of cartoons?
I did not say that, Mike Bailey. Don't get me canceled.
Easy.
I have another book to turn in. But we're going to have a really fantastic talk with a good pal of ours and someone that we've waited too long to have on the show. Tonight, Terry LaBAN is with us. Look at that. Terry and I had coffee the other day, and we had such a great conversation. And I was just like, Terry, how come I didn't ask you to be on the show yet? And he was like, I don't know. Why haven't you? So
you said, good day, sir, and you left.
I threw down my jacket. And I threw down my joint and I left. But we're going to have a great, fantastic talk about eras of cartooning. Eras, alt comics. And Terry goes way back, kind of like Steve is one of the pioneers of webcomics. He doesn't like talking about it. I know. Terry's back in those ranks in the alt comic world. Is
he tinkling? Is he tinkling on the side of the road like Steve?
What? We'll have to check his dipstick later. And also a syndicated newspaper strip artist, acclaimed graphic novelist. We got a lot to talk about. We're passing through a bunch of eras. So let me stop talking and let's get ready for rendering. Please welcome to Pencil to Pencil, Terry LaBAN. Ping! That worked. It worked. The Grundlefly didn't happen this time. Good.
That's a lot to live up to, but
well, I would hate for you to show up and you're like,
that's usually how I show up.
3 heads. Terry, thanks so much for hanging out and coming on the show with us. It's been way too long. Just for transparency's sake, and one of the things that I love about being the person that I am is that I'm in pretty good proximity with cartoonists. You kind of see that after a while. It's like, oh, okay. Part of one of my aliases is Kevin Scrapple, because bacon was taken. The 6 degrees of cartooning kind of comes through all 3 of us. Like if the 3 of us and Brett don't know somebody, then I don't know. That seems to be kind of odd. But Terry and I go way back for a while, and Terry and Mike share a lot of early similarities in how they came up. So maybe we'll just start there, Terry. Terry, you're not from Philly, are you?
No, I am from the suburbs of Detroit.
Oh, the D.
Yep. And,
so when
I moved to Philly till I was, 40 years old. So I'm really a Midwesterner.
Did you and Mike cross paths at all?
We never did, but we have several mutual friends in common, or at least one mutual friend, probably a bunch. But we were both pals with Lloyd Dangle back in the day.
So, Lloyd was my high school buddy.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
I need my binoculars. This is crazy.
Yeah,
Lloyd was my college buddy, and we worked together on the University of Michigan humor magazine, The Gargoyle.
Wow, right? Yeah.
In fact, I credit myself to some extent with discovering Lloyd because I invited him to be on the magazine. when we were in art school, because I got on it really early on. I really wanted to be on the humor magazine. My dad had gone to University of Michigan, and I would look at his old yearbooks and from the 50s, and there'd be, the Gargoyle humor magazine, and it would have pictures of the guys in their office with like stuff hanging from the ceiling and everything. I was like, I want to do that. When I go to college, that's the first thing I'm going to do. And when I got to college, I met with my advisor, and my advisor said, there's no more Gargoyle anymore. And anyways, it was crap. You don't want to do that.
What?
Probably immediately after that, I walked out on the diag, and there are these guys like with this newspaper, edition of the Gargoyle going, Gargoyle. So I was like, I want to work with you guys. So I was on it. So I was on it a couple of years, and then I went to art school, and Lloyd was in one of my classes, and I saw his work. I mean, somehow I saw that it wasn't a cartooning class because they didn't have cartooning classes, but somehow I saw his work. I was like, you got to be on the Gargoyle, and you should come. So he did. And we had this like incredible run. And I mean, he was, I want to talk about me, not Lloyd, but from the start, like Lloyd had this like incredibly developed style for a 19-year-old. I mean, it was just like we were all in complete awe of him. In fact, I have one of his. Here's a Lloyd cover.
Let me give you the screen.
1982.
Wow.
And it actually, he's kind of trying to imitate somebody else that doesn't really look like him, but like the way he drew usually, but it's still like beautiful.
Wow.
So yeah.
I love it. And you know what? There's always, anytime we talk about, well, not everybody, but if there is some sort of kind of touch point with cartoonists who go to a liberal art school, there's usually the school papers involved in some way. Like I was just talking about Maryland, and how like Frank Cho and Aaron Magruder, were doing like really sophisticated stuff in the school paper, and this just continues that. So how did
to be clear, I mean the school paper was the Michigan Daily, and they hated us and we hated them. But,
so the Gargoyle was like a kind of like a zine type of thing?
Yeah, no, it was a magazine. Here's a Gargoyle. I showed
yeah.
Like a magazine, and student publications published it, but it had nothing to do with the Daily except that we shared a building. I actually did end up doing political cartoons for the Daily my last couple of years in school. And I actually did like a comic strip for them right after I arrived, but it didn't last very long. So I did have dealings with them, but the Gargoyle was a completely separate thing.
Oh, so it was like the literary magazine type of thing, yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah. And most of our viewers would know Lloyd from Troubletown, which was the strip that he used to do.
Yeah, well,
and the airborne packaging for the
right.
medicine, yeah.
Yeah, although that's not his airborne guy anymore.
Not now, but it used to be.
Yeah, he did the original guy.
Yeah,
absolutely, sure.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, what did you major in when you were in school, Terry?
Well, I started out in the liberal arts school, because I thought you'd have to be crazy to be a cartoonist, which is what I really wanted to be. And I thought the smart thing to be would be to go to law school. But after like a year or so, I realized, like I don't want to go to law school. So, University of Michigan had, pretty good art school, which was then called the School of Art and Design. And so I decided to just apply there, and I did, and I got in. And that's where I went. And when I applied, I said to them, I want to be a cartoonist. And they said, well, we don't teach cartooning here. Why don't you study graphic design? I had no idea what graphic design was. I mean, I didn't know, but I was like, okay. Right. So that's when I majored in. And it was actually like, it was a great thing for a cartoonist to major in. And I'm really, really happy I did it, because I don't really have an innate graphic sense. Like, Lloyd, for example, did. Like, Lloyd could look at a page and understand visually, like, what would make it look good. Like, I was caught up in images and stories, and I couldn't just look at shapes. I couldn't look at a page that way, like as shapes and a composition. So learning to do that was really, really important.
And that was kind of like the beginning of that, wasn't it? Kind of commercial art before it turned into graphic design.
No, graphic design was commercial art. I
Right.
mean,
That's what I meant.
Right.
Like it kind of, it kind of stood.
Lloyd and I were in the same graphic design vocational class, Mrs. Clark's class in Huron High in Ann Arbor. And so you could take, like, some guys could take, auto shop or welding or whatever. That's where I met him, was in that graphic design class. And then we also had a vocational print shop. So you did the graphic design, so then you could go do the stuff to print the stuff in Burley Hendricks print shop. And so that allowed me as a teenager, when I was 15, to get a job in a local art agency. So I started doing graphic design and all that stuff when I was 15 because of the vocational class.
Did you take drafting?
They did not have, for some reason, I don't remember them having drafting. Maybe they had stopped it, or maybe they didn't have a teacher that could do that. But I mean, I sort of learned drafting from wanting to draw comics, because you got to learn how to do all that perspective and everything.
Yeah, I took graphic in high school and college. As a matter of fact, this is my drafting brush from high school, and I still use it to like brush off the eraser crumbs.
It's so clean, Terry. You don't make mistakes.
No, it's actually not that clean. I make a lot of mistakes, but they made things real good back then, and it's really held up. It's been a very useful item. But yeah, drafting is the other class that like I kind of looked. I entered it in askance, but then after I was done, realized, wow, it really gets you to think how things are put together in this really direct way. So that was really useful. Also.
Before college, what gave you the cartooning bug? What was you mentioned you before we went on that it wasn't the spinner rack stuff necessarily. It wasn't superhero comics. What was it? The comic strips? Was it?
Yeah. So I wanted to be a cartoonist and nothing else since I was about 6 years old.
Wow.
And what made me want to do it was Peanuts, but not reading Peanuts because I couldn't understand Peanuts. In fact, I still kind of can't understand Peanuts. I mean, Peanuts. Like the humor of Peanuts escapes me a little bit. Like I've never really been down with the like poor Charlie Brown thing. Like it always seemed a little like, there's something of a humble brag, about Peanuts. It's like Charlie Brown's this put upon guy, but he's like the best guy in the strip. So it's kind of like everybody hates me, but secretly like I know that I'm like better than they are. And I always that always kind of bugged me when I was old enough to figure it out. But the way Charles Schulz drew, in particular, the way he drew grass, there was something just so juicy and beautiful about that line. At 6, that's where I wanted to be. I felt like that was like the highest thing that you could ever aspire to, was to create something like that. And maybe even I thought maybe you could like live in that world. Like if you drew it, you could live in it. And that was, kind of it for me. And I just thought of myself as a cartoonist from a really early age. And like a lot of cartoonists, like probably like you guys and like most cartoonists I met, I was like the kid that could draw, in my high school, right? So if you wanted to draw something, they would ask me, like I did like a yearbook cover in 7th grade, which like I could go get for you, but I don't even know if you'd be able to see it, but but I was like, that was my social cachet because I was like a small kid, I was sucked at sports. Anybody could mess with me. So, I was a funny kid and I could draw, and that, that's how I survived my childhood. And and people always told me, I always got affirmation for that, and so I got very attached to the notion that I'm a cartoonist. I have to do this the rest of my life, and to do anything else would be a failure. And not only do I have to do it, I have to find a way to make a living at it, because that's the only way it really counts. Otherwise, you're just like a hobbyist. So, and I thought this way at a very early age, and it's never left me. I mean, I still.
So now, there had to be a moment when you saw that there was a person that actually did it, because you can read it and you can be a fan of the stuff. But like I would say, when I was a kid, you would watch The Wonderful World of Disney and you would say, oh, these are guys that actually draw the cartoons? Was there a cartoon, or there's a magazine or a book or something that you saw that said, "Hi, this is Charles Schultz drawing the Magic Graphs"?
I would see his picture in the back of like Peanuts class, the classic Peanuts collection. I had that, and I would carry it around with me. His picture was in the back, so I mean, obviously, I knew that there were people that did this stuff, but I really was focused on the work itself. They didn't matter to me that much. I wasn't particularly interested in them. That came later, but it took a long time for me to kind of get my head around cartoonists. And I didn't meet a cartoonist. Who was the first cartoonist I met? It may have been Draper Hill. So there's this guy, the political cartoonist of the Detroit News was a guy named Draper Hill. You may remember him, Mike. He was there for years and years and years.
I don't really remember. Yeah. No.
Somehow I connected with him, and like we went out. I would go down to Detroit, and we would go out to lunch. And he was really a sweetheart. And I think he was the first living cartoonist that I probably met outside, kids my age that were also wanted to be cartoonists, like people like Floyd and stuff. But they weren't professional. I mean, we were all just wannabe. I didn't meet a bunch of cartoonists until I went to my first San Diego, or my first comic convention, I think, was Chicago Comic Con. Would have been like 1989, I'm going to say 1988. No, it was way earlier than that. It was like 1986, 1987. Yeah. So I met, when I was in Detroit. So I graduated from college, and I'd done, I'd drawn for the Gargoyle, where I did sort of my version of underground comics, which I was really into in college. And then I drew for the newspaper, doing political cartoons. And then I went on a long trip. I traveled around the world for a year and a half. And then I came back, and I moved back to Ann Arbor because I didn't know where else to go. And it was, I had connections there, and it was near where I grew up. So I lucked out. I went around for a really brief period of time. I worked at this place called Highland Appliance doing like graphic design stuff. Actually, remember Highland Appliance?
I had a job there.
Oh, did you?
A teenager, yeah.
I don't want to yell.
Specifically to get a bargain on the VCR so I could watch. I could record animation and watch it freeze frame.
Oh, there you go. It was really a fascinating place to work, because I worked in where they made the circulars that they put in all the newspapers. So there was a woman there whose sole job was to draw like the microwaves and the refrigerators and stuff. And she would do it in ink, like these things that would go in the circles, and they were beautiful, like these beautiful, like it looked like it was done by a computer, but it was done by hand back at that time. They didn't use photographs. I didn't last long there, like maybe like a couple months. I ended up running the stat machine, if you remember what those were.
Oh yeah.
But after that, I was in Ann Arbor, and I made a little illustration portfolio for myself and went around looking for illustration work. And I went to the Ann Arbor News, and I showed them my stuff, and the illustration editor actually liked my stuff, and said, "Yeah, we'll use you sometime. You should go talk to the editorial page editor, because they buy political cartoons." So I went to the editorial page editor, and she said, "Yeah, we buy political cartoons, and we'll pay you like $50 or whatever. We're looking for local issues." So I went home, and I read the paper, and drew up some ideas, and I went in and I sold them. And pretty soon I was doing four a week.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. I was doing a lot, and between that and illustration and drawing caricatures at parties, I could support myself with my work. So I was able to do that at, fairly early age. I was like 22, 23, 24 years old.
What was the development from Peanuts to underground comics? Where did you stumble upon them?
So I was really into comic strips. So when I was coming up, and maybe when you were coming up, I don't know how old you are, to be a syndicated cartoonist in the newspapers was like, that was the highest thing you could aspire to. And for years, I mean, when I was doing, comics and stuff, whenever I tell people I was a cartoonist, they would always ask, "Are you syndicated?" I mean, that hasn't happened in a really long time. But, until like the end of the 90s, that was the thing. So those comics, those were the things that I really liked and wanted to do. And then the comics that I liked comic books, but it was like Mad Magazine. It was like Archie. It was like Harvey comics I liked, Donald Duck comics I liked. superhero comics, like I just didn't get them. Like, I mean, it was like, to me, it was like reading like a computer manual. I mean, I would open it up and it's just like there's a guy in a and he does like, I didn't like, it was just completely opaque, you know, like I just didn't relate to that stuff at all. But I liked the only mainstream comics I liked. I did like Conan the Barbarian, you know, because I liked the Robert E. Howard books. So I would buy the comics. The comics were never as good as the books, but you know, I liked them well enough that I would buy them on, you know, a pretty regular basis. I liked the sword and sorcery stuff, the historical type of stuff. So that's kind of what I liked when I went to, but I was always, you know, I've always been attracted to the more cartoony end of things, the more expressionistic end of things. Traditional comic book drawing, as much as I admire it, like that's not me. That's not where I come from. So I went to college and I knew that underground comics existed, you know, because by that time I was a frequenter of head shops. And, you know, they would, at that time, at the end of the 70s, you could still go into a head shop and see racks of underground comics. And there was like, you know, Crumb posters. And of course I knew Keep on Truckin', didn't know much about it. You know, I remember seeing his like, hey kids, remember to wipe your ass. Remember that one?
That's with the toilet paper with the eyes on it, right?
Yeah, they turned that into a poster, right? And you would see it in the head shops, and it like scared me. I was like, Jesus, what is it? Like,
Yeah, because it felt sort of
like
it was
dirty
stuffing.
and like scary. But I went.
No,
so,
it's a toilet with the mouth. That's what it is.
Yeah. So I went to college, and you know, I was exploring Ann Arbor, and like I said, there was the last head shop in Ann Arbor, or well, there's a couple last head shops, I guess, but there was this place on Liberty it was kind of in a basement, and the name is escaping me now, which is really irritating, but it had been a head shop and it was kind of converting into like a punk head shop. So they would sell like, you know, punk pants with like zippers on them and, you know, red flag, and, you know, dog collars and stuff like that.
Clothespins through denim.
Yeah. You know, this was like the very early 80s and actually like probably 1979. But what they did have that really interested me was underground comics, and they had this huge selection of underground comics. And plus they had paperbacks and they had all kinds of stuff. So I bought a book called Robert Crumb's Collection. It was like a collection of Crumb stuff. I forget what it's called. It's over there somewhere. And I don't know. I've never seen a copy of it anywhere else. I think it was kind of a one-off. I'm not sure it was like actually a legal book. I think maybe somebody just put it together. But it had like a lot of his best stuff, his most famous stuff. And it just completely blew me away. I mean, I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is who this guy is. Like the notion that you could do this with comics, everything just kind of came together. It was just like being hit by lightning. And I was like, I want to do stuff like this. And then of course there was this whole world of other underground comics that I got into. And also a lot of my friends were into them, and, you know, stuff by like Bill Griffith and the Griffith Observatory in particular. It wasn't so much the zippy stuff, you know. Raw was, you know, well, actually this was before Raw, but National Lampoon had undergroundy stuff, and there was just this whole constellation of stuff that I discovered that was kind of floating around and available at that shop. I bought a lot of it there, and I just became immersed in it, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this like funny, transgressive stuff that pulled in archetypes from like the subconscious of all of America and like put them on paper. And I felt like that was sort of, you know, again, like, you know, the highest place a cartoonist could go was, you know, the place Crumb went. I didn't sympathize so much with, you know, the sex stuff and the misogyny and like that didn't connect with me so much. But what connected with me was the way he was putting himself out there. You know, it wasn't so much that was what I would say, but just the way he was doing it was just,
I mean, he had such a strong voice compared to a lot of other, even a lot of the other underground cartoonists.
Well, you know, he was underground, he was underground cartoon,
right? Because, you know, he was a character in his stories in a way that, you know, like the guys who are drawing the, you know, Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers or the others, they drew characters, but he sort of made himself a character, which was kind of unique in a way. And
well, there were other people that did that. I mean, maybe a lot of them were inspired by him, but Justin Green. I mean, you could go down the line, but I mean, the truth is, everybody in underground comics was imitating Crumb. I mean, everybody was just imitating Crumb. That the whole movement was people imitating Crumb. That was what it was. I don't think that really occurred to me at the time, but in retrospect, you can see it. Anyways, I mean, so that was the stuff that I really wanted to do. I wanted to do stuff like that. Like I didn't want to do funny comic strips anymore. And unfortunately, I tried to draw like Crumb too, which took me down a road that I wish I hadn't been on, and that it was really a road to nowhere, and then I kind of had to dig myself out of it at a certain point.
Hey, Terry, can I stick a pin in you for a second? Yeah. So with that, and with you being kind of attracted to Crumb stuff at that point in time, and you're starting to transition into thinking in those points, did your drawing technique change? Like, were you all of a sudden a rotring and a rapidograph guy, or trying to make the same kind of lines that Crumb was doing?
Well, the truth is, I didn't know how Crumb drew. I didn't know how anybody drew. And unfortunately, I didn't really do the kind of research I really should have done. Not long ago, you pointed out a book that you had been really into, and I actually bought a copy of who is it? Is it Bill? Who is it? The
Ken Muse book.
Ken Muse.
Cartooning. Yeah.
Well, I didn't read stuff like that. I just sort of forged ahead. I heard Crumb used rapidographs, so I started drawing in rapidographs. But I didn't have a way I drew before. Like when I was in high school or whatever, I would just draw with a pen or something. And I started drawing with crow quills because I thought that I could draw on those, and they weren't great, and it took me years to figure that out. But that's what I tried to do. So I tried to imitate Crumb, but I wasn't doing it I was sort of making up my own way of doing it. So it came out completely different. And caused me sort of endless frustration because there was a lot, I didn't really understand how to draw comics. I didn't really understand how to make comics work. And it took me a really long time to figure that out, far into my professional career.
So
really.
You didn't get a book from the library on cartooning where they show you so-and-so uses this pen or this brush or whatever.
I mean, I read a few things like that, but not as much as I should. It was really just I'm just going to try to do it. I thought I could do it. I was kind of arrogant. I was I'm a brilliant cartoonist. Everybody says so. I'm just going to take this crow quill, and I'm going to create a masterwork. And I don't really need to read a book. That was kind of my attitude.
Yeah, I think I remember Crumb. We were talking before we went on, because I moved from Detroit to Ann Arbor when I was 13, and before we would always go up on the weekends. And I remember going to the Agamotto, which was always closed, but he always had stuff outside. You would go upstairs, and it was in the back of the second floor. And then sometimes we would go into these head shops, or you would go into the community news center or the Blue Front, or there was a whole bunch of places like that are probably all long gone now. But I remember going in and seeing some underground comics. And as a kid, comics are comics. You don't necessarily sort in that way, because if you see a comic book, it's a comic book, right? And then I think it was a Fabulous Furry Freak Brother, and it probably was a Crumb thing. And I wanted my parents to buy it, and my dad, who liked comics, looked at it and realized it was, not age appropriate. Although they were actually pretty liberal about that when I think about it going along. So that was probably the first time I saw that. And also every once in a while, my dad, I remember a couple times home, Screw magazine. And I think one had a Wally Wood cover, and one had a Bill Ward cover, which, as a kid, is funny. You see big titties, you just, that's just like a funny thing,
Right.
But yeah, I think, you could walk into a lot of stores in Ann Arbor in the 70s and the 80s and find underground stuff because it's a college town, so you're going to find a lot of stuff like that, a lot of head shops. And there was that one Middle Earth that you could go in and you could get your bongs and your fantasy stuff, but also your pipes and your various things for altering your states. And I just think that nothing seemed weird because it was just sort of probably because Ann Arbor was not normal compared to the average city around it, which was probably a lot more, Michigan militia.
I grew up in the suburbs, so it was not like that. There were not head shops on every corner.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mike. Go ahead, finish what you're saying.
I was going to say, in fact, I remember right around that late high school, 10th grade, I went to my first science fiction show. So that's when I went to my first Comic-Con and my first science fiction show. And the science fiction show was like really weird to me because I had read the book Forever War by Joe Haldeman. I don't know if you ever read it, but it was a very good science fiction book. And he was there. But then like all the other stuff that goes on at science fiction conventions was a little above my pay grade at 15 years old, and I was thinking like, wow, like today that place would get raided. The state troops would come in and like be raiding that stuff. But
lots of bankers boxes. Oh,
yeah,
let's go in. Put in the box.
Yeah, because you would see all kinds of like sort of lewd and lascivious stuff, I'm sure, by local community standards. But you could go into a head shop as a 15-year-old and buy stuff that technically would probably get them in trouble.
Yeah.
And especially today, people would get really upset. It was a lot more freewheeling back then.
We have our first question of the night for Terry, our good buddy W.S. Wiss. What up, Bill? Bill asked, Terry, did you get into American Splendor at all?
American Splendor. I mean it. How can I say this? There's a lot of things I really like and admire about American Splendor. I'd have to say, like, I didn't really see it until I was probably in my late 20s. I knew it was around. I didn't really appreciate its significance. I met Harvey Pekar right after I moved into Chicago in probably 1990, and he was visiting this woman who was a friend. He was married to Joyce at the time, but he somehow ended up at the house of this woman named Carol Sobosinski, who lived a couple of blocks from where I lived in Chicago at that time. She ended up marrying Jay Lynch some years later, the guy that did Nard and Pat. So there's a connection for you. But she invited me over, and there was Harvey Pekar on her front lawn, this like gnarled, craggy little guy. And I didn't really know exactly who he was. Like, I wasn't enough into American Splendor to kind of appreciate Harvey Pekar. I mean, I knew who he was. And he was this strange guy. He like, I guess he kind of liked me. He called me soon after that, and we started talking. Because I just started being published by Fantagraphics. I think my first book had come out. So I was like a legit, alt comics guy. And he called me, and the first thing he asked me when I picked up the phone was, "Did you go to college?" And it turned out like he's one of these guys that like never went to college and kind of feels like, less than because of it, but actually feels like he's way smarter than most of the people who did. So he's kind of like, he's like, he had this chip on his shoulder. I don't know. Like I never talked about, I never mentioned college, but you know, he was kind of like, you know, that's how he started out with me. So
I love that. I love your Harvey Picar voice too. It's like,
yeah. So like I was, you know, my feeling about American Splendor is that a lot of the stuff, like I kind of sometimes, not all the time, because I think there's some really amazing stories in American Splendor. And I actually used one of his American Splendor stories in my comics class. I had my kids read it like every semester. But a lot of times I'd read American Splendor and feel like, why, you know, how did you get me to read this? Like, why? Like, why? You know, like I get like your thing, like your like boring daily life is as legitimate as like, you know, a superhero story. But like, actually, like, I'm not sure I agree. Like, I mean, you know, like the story about you like making toast and like, you know, being worried about like your jazz review, and then like Joyce comes home and like, you know, you pet the cat. I mean, like I just kind of felt a little unsatisfied by that personally. But on the other hand, it has to be said that first of all, it was like amazingly influential, and I always respect stuff that is influential. He did something that nobody else did, like, and he did it like he was very successful at getting his stuff out. I really admire that. If Crumb had never been involved, would anybody have ever heard of Harvey Picar? I don't know, but hey, you know, you use what you have. So in the aggregate, I've come to really respect Harvey Picar, but I look kind of in askance a little bit. I also had some dealings with Joyce Bravner that were kind of weird. She asked me to do something for, I don't remember what it was, an anthology or something. And like we talked about it, she would like call me all the time about this thing. And then she disappeared. Like she completely disappeared. And it turned out she got really involved with some organization, Children of War or something. And she got like really involved in that and like dropped this entire project.
wow.
Like, you know, numerous artists involved. And it was just kind of a weird thing. So that's me and Harvey Picar. But, you know, far be it for me to pronounce Harvey Picar. I mean, he you know, he did some, you know, amazing things, and he changed comics. I mean,
Well,
you know,
well, maybe this will be a good time to kind of punch ahead and talk about your Fantagraphics era. So tell us about what you were doing at the kind of the beginning of that, and kind of now that you're in Chicago at this point when you started doing Fanta. Or was that
no? I was in Ann Arbor when they
were still in Ann Arbor.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, it's funny because I didn't know about any of that stuff. Like I didn't know about the alt comics thing at all. Like as far as I knew when I came back from my trip, you know, underground comics kind of, or whatever is left of underground comics kind of stops at Raw. Like, and Raw was like way, like I couldn't aspire to Raw. Like that was too artsy, and Weirdo. That was the other thing that was going on. Like Crumb was publishing Weirdo, which was an anthology where with a lot of, there were a lot of artists in it that later became players in the alt scene. It was edited by his wife. I submitted something to that and I got rejected. She did write a handwritten note, but so I couldn't get in Weirdo. So I didn't know what else was going on. I came back from my trip and my housemate was into comics, and she was bringing home like Love and Rockets and some of that stuff, which was new and I hadn't seen it before. I ended up at Dave's Comics. I found, you know, Dan Klaus's stuff, Lloyd Llewellyn. I found what else? I don't remember, but all the Fantagraphics stuff that was coming out in the early 80s. And I was like, wow, like this is like the happening. Like you can do this. Like people are doing new comics. It's really exciting. But I didn't know how to get into it. And I started drawing my own comics that I hope to submit. But I didn't really know how to do it. And I ended up meeting this guy named Matt Feazell. Do you know who Matt Feazell is?
Sure.
Matt Feazell is like the most famous and influential cartoonist nobody's ever heard of. But if he didn't invent mini comics, he is close to inventing mini comics. He's kind of the Ramones of comics. He was doing this stick figure stuff.
Stick man, yeah.
Yeah.
Bob the Angry Flower?
No,
Sorry?
that's Bob. No, that's Stephen Notley.
Cynical.
Sorry.
Cynical Man.
Cynical
Right. There it is.
Yeah,
Hello.
yeah.
Just
I have
really,
a drawing by him of Wolverine, Stickman, Cynical.
yeah.
And then
Well, he did a bunch of like versions of mainstream stuff eventually. But you know, I met Matt. Matt moved to Ypsilanti around this time from, I think, Minnesota or something like that. And I met Matt somehow through comic circles, and we really liked each other. He's about 10 years older than me. And he told me about Comic Cons. I didn't know anything about comics or the comic scene. He's like, you should go to Chicago Comic Con with me. We'll go together. We'll drive to Chicago. So, we drove to Chicago and we went to the Chicago Comic Con. I'd never been to a Comic Con before, and I saw these mini comics, and I had like a bunch of Xeroxes of my, of my comics that I hope to show. I took them around to all the indie publishers, and everybody was like, oh, well, if you came last year, we would have published you. But, underground comic, black and white comics were huge last year, but now they've completely crashed. So we're not interested because the Teenage Mutant Turtles had come out and sparked this black and white boom that had like crashed like a year later. So nobody was interested in publishing black and white comics. But Matt took me over to the table where they were selling mini comics. I'd never seen mini comics before. And I was like, oh, okay. And at first I was like, I'm not going to like do this like lame stuff. Like I'm a pro. Like I'm going to like get published by a real publisher. But then I realized there's this whole scene of people like making mini comics and trading them. And I thought to myself, well, instead of just like doing comics and like putting them in my drawer when the publisher doesn't buy them, I can make a mini comic and like I can trade them. And, maybe that's a way to get out there. So that's what I did. This was my first mini comic on its existence. And I drew this up and I actually had it professionally printed. So
it looks real crisp, man.
Yeah, it's nice. It's not a Xerox, a copy machine comic. I actually
that looks great.
Yeah, it offset printing.
Yeah.
And I put it out and I traded it and I sent it around, and there were these, small press comics explosion. There was this whole, this was long before the internet. So this was all done through the mail. And in the back of cool comic shops, they would sell, small press. Matt was a big player. So he kind of like introduced me to people. And I did 2 issues of my self-published comic, Unsupervised Existence. And then I got a really good review in the Comics Journal. Like somebody, Rob Rohde was the guy's name, and he gave me this glowing review. And I'd been sending stuff to Fantagraphics, so then they offered to publish it. Mm-hmm. And actually, Ripoff Press offered to publish it at the same time, interestingly enough. So Ripoff Press, I wanted to go with Fantagraphics because they were the hot publisher. But Ripoff Press ended up doing a reprint of my mini comics stuff, and I think I did a new piece as well. But then I was, then I started being published by Fantagraphics, and it was a trip. They didn't pay me very much, and but I was really, I really wanted to do it, so I did it. And right after the first issue came out, I moved to Chicago, and for various reasons. And when I moved to Chicago, when I got to Chicago, Dan Klaus contacted me. He sent me like a postcard or something because we were both Fantagraphics. You heard, I guess probably Gary Groth told him, hey, there's a Fantagraphics guy moving. And we had a friend in common. He's my age. We're like the exact same age. So a friend of his in college was one of my best friends or in high school. A friend of his in high school was one of my best friends in college. Wow. So I had kind of an entree, I didn't really know who he was. I'd seen Lloyd Llewellyn, but he wasn't like a bigwig, So I ended up hanging out with him, and we got to be good friends for a while. And that was kind of like, and then I went to San Diego. Matt Vazell again told me, like, if you really want to help your career, you should go to San Diego. So we went to San Diego. We actually went together. And
are you sure you said Bullwinkle?
Like that was just a mind blower. I mean,
what year was that, Terry?
This was 1989. My first book had come out. I think Dan's first 8-Ball had come out. I may have met Dan Klaus in San Diego. I think I met Dan Klaus in San Diego. I think I came up to him and I said, we have a friend in common. And I said, this is my name. And I said, I'm being published by Fantagraphics too, and I'm moving to Chicago. And he was like, oh, you should look me up. So I think that's how it happened. I went.
That tracks.
Yeah, I went to my first San Diego before I went to move to Chicago. But I went to San Diego, and it was like all these underground cartoonists whose stuff I'd been reading. I mean, you asked about like the real people behind the cartoons. All these underground cartoonists whose stuff I'd been reading, a lot of them pretty obscure now, in the head shop or buying were at San Diego. I mean, I met like Guy Caldwell, I met Phoebe Gluckner, I met Dan McNeil, I met Denny O'Neil.
Wow.
Gosh, like just tons of people, and this was, it wasn't that long after this. It was only 20 years since, it was only like 15 years since the height of, it really hadn't been a long time since the height of undergrounds. And that was like incredible. So, and then after that, I was a Fantagraphics guy, and I did unsupervised. I did 8 issues of unsupervised existence, and then I switched it up and did a comic called Cud, and that last 8 issues. They were always that last 8 issues because I would do 4 a year, and by the end of 2 years, I'd realize it was going nowhere.
Now, were you making your living doing that, or were you doing other things as well?
Oh no, they were paying me like $500 an issue, so. I'd work on it for like, 2 months, and, I'd make $500. But I had a pretty big network of freelance stuff. Like I was doing a lot of illustration. The comics did end up getting me work because they were distributed nationally. So people would see them and get in touch with me occasionally. And I had enough work to, justify my existence. Still drew caricatures. I had all these different kind of income streams that I would have.
Magazines and print had so much. Were able to keep so many cartoonists going before they collapsed.
Yeah,
it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of stuff for the newspapers. I did a lot of stuff for the Detroit News. I did a lot of stuff for the Ann Arbor News. I did, a lot of magazine stuff. I did a lot of stuff for the UAW of all places.
Really?
Yeah, like I did comics for their like union. Like, I mean, I would do like whatever. Like I would do, I'm a total hack. Like, you pay me money, I'll like do whatever you want. Like, I wasn't terribly picky. I did stuff for like Christianity Today. There was some editor there that liked me.
Political cartoons?
Not political cartoons. I worked for this paper called a magazine called In These Times for years and years and years. This like socialist magazine, but I did political cartoons for them for a long time, and a lot of illustration. That was like a part-time job. So, just a lot of different stuff, like whatever I could do. So
now, how were you delivering this stuff? Because this was before the internet. So would they fax stuff? Would they call you? Would you mail it? How were you doing all that stuff?
I'd put it between 2 big pieces of cardboard and like wrap them up, 22 pages.
You'd send them originals, right? Yeah.
Call the UPS man, and off it would go. And the thing about it was, like, I would never know how it was going to turn out until it was published, and nobody at Fantagraphics edited me at all. Like, whatever I sent in, that's what they would print. Typos, like whatever, like lines dropping out because I didn't really know how to draw for print. Like I had a lot of fine lines, and I was erasing it.
How large? What size were you working at the time?
Pretty big.
Okay, cool.
Bigger, 14 by. I mean, they were pretty big. I have the like. I don't remember the exact size, but it was like 14 by 17, something like that. Like big, like the big Bristol pad size. Later on, I went down to 11 by 14, and that was better. But they were pretty big. They were pretty big.
It wasn't pressure from Fantagraphics after 8 issues to move. You were like, no, I'm gonna end it here. I'm gonna end it after.
Yeah. Oh, they didn't care. They just
you could still be doing it today.
They just didn't care. As long as I could do whatever. I could they didn't care what I sent. They didn't. They would print whatever I sent. And if you look at that stuff, it's a very pure expression of like where I was at. I mean, I was always hoping like to find an audience. Like I was always hoping to do stuff that people would like, but I could never, like, it always just came out a certain way. So it's a very pure creative expression. I mean, there was no pressure on any level to achieve anything, including sales. So, I would call Kim Thompson, and I would say, hey, Kim, how come my book's not selling better? He'd go, because it's good. like what?
Wow.
Thanks, Kim. Like, I know you're working hard out there. Like,
Hey, Terry, we have a question. Our good buddy Christophe from France goes, "Hi, Terry. Do you know if you've been published in other languages?" Second part. I've seen and read your work in newspapers for sure, but I remember visiting a Fanta booth group in Angoulême in 97 or 98, I think.
my stuff has been translated sometimes, some things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not completely sure what all that is. I think some of my alt comics were translated. I think so. I know my writing for other, like I did a lot of writing for DC. I did a lot of writing for, I wrote Donald Duck comics for 14 years. I mean, that's all been translated. But and I know Edge City, my comic strip was translated for a while. But the Fantagraphics stuff, I don't know. I mean, I was out by 1998, 1997. I left Fantagraphics in 1994 because Kim Thompson couldn't sell my book. And I went to Dark Horse. And because I knew Bob Schreck was like kind of a fan of mine, and he was like heading Dark Horse at the time. And then I met Jeff Smith, who did Bone, at a Comic-Con, and I was in a circle of people talking to him, and I was bitching about Fantagraphics, and I was saying, should I move to Dark Horse? Because I've been talking to Bob about it. He was like, oh yeah, go to Dark Horse. They're a way better publisher. You should totally go to Dark Horse. So I was selling like 4,000 at Fantagraphics, and I went to Dark Horse, and I did Cud Comics. I should have renamed it better, but I didn't. And I went to visit them in Portland right after the first issue came out because my sister-in-law lives in Seattle, so we were out on the West Coast to see them. And I go to Portland. I took the train down to Portland, and I go, and the sales guy at Dark Horse, Dave Scroggie, he's like, I think it was Dave Scroggie. He calls me into his office, and he's like, yeah, I want to talk to you about Cud. And he was like, yeah, it's selling 4,000. Like Fantagraphics, it was sold the exact same number, So I was like, okay. And then they canceled it after the first. But there was so much and so they can't. And he was like, yeah, your book's canceled. Like I'd gone there all the way down to Portland to visit them. I was like, gonna go back to Seattle, hang out with all these Fantagraphics people, and I just left Fantagraphics, F you, I'm gonna do so much better with Dark Horse, and they just canceled my book. So I took the train back up to Seattle. I was so sad, I was just like, oh my God, this is terrible. And I actually went to a Fantagraphics party that night.
Oh no!
And it was at Pete Baggs' house, and Jim Woodring was there, and Ellen Forney, and all these people, Roberta Gregory, all these people were there. And I was like, I couldn't tell anybody, I wasn't going to tell them yeah, my book got canceled yesterday. So that was a really weird and dispiriting experience. But then when I got home, there was I guess people at Dark Horse kind of Cud because they petitioned Mike Peters, who is the owner of Dark Horse, and I think it was Mike Peters, and they decided to keep it going.
Mike Richardson, yeah.
Mike Richardson, that's right. Mike Peters is a cartoonist.
Yeah, he does. Mother Goose and Grimm.
And they decided to keep it going.
Yeah,
and it went for 8 issues.
Now that sounds like that could be a comic book story.
Yeah, I got a lot of, and but they did pay me $1,000 an issue instead of $500.
Well, hey, you're leveling up, man.
And they edited me.
How did that feel at that point? Because you'd gone so long with no notes. So how did that feel getting edited?
It was great.
Yeah,
I mean, it was great. To have somebody tell me something wasn't working.
I was reading it.
Yeah, somebody's actually paying attention to me. I'm not just a ghost, Sure, Terry, we'll print your stuff. It was great. And I was telling Jamar, this is how little I knew about comics for years. I did, 16 issues of my alternative comics. And I didn't know. So my editor goes to me, Terry, when you have 2 word balloons that different people are speaking and you just leave them open so they're connected, it means that the same person is talking. Right? And I was like, oh, really? Well, gosh, I wish I'd known that.
Yeah, thanks.
It's how come nobody told me?
That's a pro tip.
Wow.
Hey, Terry, we have another question. Bill comes back in and asks, you wrote Donald Duck. Have you interacted with Don Rosa?
I didn't interact with Don Rosa. I have seen Don Rosa. Don Rosa has walked past me. Don Rosa occupied kind of a higher plane in Duck World. He was kind of like he was revered in that space. So he would not deign to talk to me, most likely. But I mean, I didn't try to be fair. I don't want to cast aspersions on Don Rosa. But I have seen Don Rosa and occupied the same space he has, but I haven't actually interacted with him.
And you said you wrote it. So who was your? Did you have a consistent illustrator on those?
No, it was all different people. And if you don't know anything about this, like Donald Duck comics are published and still they were and still are published by a company called Egmont, which is a Disney licensee, and they were huge. I mean, they were absolutely huge. They would do like a weekly floppy, and they would do these digest size that look like, the thick kind of, they look like the Archie comics that you see in the grocery store, these paperback digests. And I think they would do one of those a week as well. And they would sell like 4 million. I mean, it was huge. So I did that, and I ended up writing like 100 pages Duck a year.
How did that come to pass? They were reading Cud and thought
they were. A guy in 1995, and it's really weird because it was right around this time that, first of all, I had a kid, and I was like, I got to figure out how to make money at comics. And I was hanging out in Chicago. So I had like a lunch group of a lot of the comic people in town. We would go to lunch. I don't remember how often. It was like every other week or something. We would meet for lunch. It ended up being like 20 people. It was people like Hillary Barta and Larry Martyr and a lot of people. Alex Ross would come.
That's the Chicago crew,
yeah. Like all the comic people in Chicago, we would all go out to lunch. And I realized all these guys, they're all actually making a living at this. I'm doing stuff for $500. How can I make a living? And I knew my drawing style was not going to be commercial in mainstream comics. But I thought, well, everybody says I'm a good writer, so maybe I can try to write. So that year, 1994, I went to San Diego, and I started, I had a lot of contacts. I knew a lot of people, and I started going around saying, hey, I'd love to write. Let me try and write something. And people started, giving me some stuff. I did a Grendel story. And I didn't know about any of this stuff. I was just like, yeah, whatever. I got to make money. I'll do Grendel. Who's Grendel? Just send me a bunch of Grendel, and then I'll write a story. But out of the blue, I get a postcard from this guy from Europe. He was like, I really like your stuff. I think you'd be good writing Donald Duck. I was like, okay, Donald Duck. Yeah, that sounds good. So I just started doing it that way, but it took me years to realize that. And I started out kind of slow. At first I'd only do a few stories a year. They tended to be long though. And then after I'd done that for a few years, they brought me on and made me a regular writer, and they would assign me stories. So that was way better. But it took me a long time to realize that it was actually this really plum job that a lot of people wanted to do, because Donald Duck doesn't exist here. I mean, they reprint them in Gladstone Comics,
right?
So you can get them, some of that stuff. I mean, a small fraction of it. But it took me, I didn't realize that it's actually a coveted job, especially in Europe. But so they would just randomly assign, a lot of different artists to my stuff. And it's beautiful. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that stuff, but it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, those European artists are they're just unbelievable.
Yeah, there's a whole school of guys in Spain and Italy.
Yeah.
That do stuff that I follow several of them on Instagram, and these guys are just fantastic cartoonists.
Your teeth fall out. I mean, it's just, I would look at the stuff I would get, and I would get black and white proofs of all the stories. I used to have huge stacks of them, and they're all gone now. I wish I'd kept some, but I mean, the art is, with when it's printed, it's in color, but it's really so much nicer in black and white.
Terry, I have a question for you, because I know this is something that a lot of mainstream guys do and a lot of strip artists do. Did you start collecting original work?
I've got some, especially when I was doing alt comics, I would trade with people. I've got some Dan Klaus pages. I've got a Chris Ware page. I've got Doug Allen page. But I don't have a ton. Part of that's just because I'm not really a collector. I don't have a collecting impulse. I'm not like one of those, like I've got like, no offense if you do, but I've got like an entire
We all do.
toy robots. I mean, it's very common for cartoonists to be collectors.
Yeah, don't pay no attention.
This is a photograph. I downloaded off the web.
Yeah, you can see right behind me. I got stuff.
I'm not against collecting by any means. I mean, but I just don't. I'm not systematic about it, and so I don't have as much original art as I kind of wish I had more, honestly. But I do have some nice stuff.
Let's punch ahead and let's talk about the newspaper strip.
Yeah, Edge City.
Yeah, so tell us about how all that happened.
Oh goodness. Well, so in the late 90s, I kind of reached the end of my little comics career. Like I said, I had 2 kids by then, and my the alt stuff, that wasn't really happening anymore. I just like kind of lost my impulse to do it. It just, it paid so little that to pay a nanny to watch my kids while I do a comic for 2 months that's going to pay me $1,000, like that just like wasn't happening. Like
that's hard math right there.
I mean, that's like that's like wife kick you out territory. So that wasn't happening, and my attempt to become like a full-time writer, besides Donald Duck, which I couldn't live off of, I'd done a bunch of stuff for DC, but what I really wanted to do was a monthly series that would provide me some security. But I just, I had nothing, and I just couldn't get it going. And I'm not ultimately a mainstream comics guy. Like I couldn't, like I didn't have that mindset that I could like deal with that audience. I wanted it, but I didn't have it. So it was like, what was I going to do? I had a deal with Nickelodeon around that time, because I was telling this to Jamar, the guy that ended up doing Cat Dog had been my art director in these times, and after he got the show, which was like 1996, he set me up with his agent, and the agent got a development deal for one of my ideas. So I was like, this is going to save me. I'm going to like have an office next to Pete, with like cardboard cutouts of my characters hanging from the ceiling. There's going to be like 20 guys, and we're going to meet every morning to hash out the, design. I'm going to be busy. But it didn't end up, it turned out, and it went as far as a Bible for the book. They flew me out like twice, to Pasadena, which was cool. But it turned out it was like exactly the same idea as Fairy Godmother, Fairly Odd Parents.
Fairly Odd Parents, yeah.
Pretty close to that. So it didn't happen. And that was really crushing, because I was just like, okay, now I really do have to go to law school. I mean, I was like almost 40. Like I just didn't have like another trick. Like I really didn't know what I was going to do. But more or less out of the blue, Jay Kennedy at King Features called me up, and I knew him through San Diego. Go to comics conventions, kids. It's like the best way to get into the business. But I knew him through San Diego, and he was like an underground guy, right? In fact, he wrote a really famous guide to underground comics. So we kind of connected over that, and he knew my stuff because I was Fantagraphics, and so we were kind of friendly. And I told him at some point I would love to do a comic strip. I mean, I never gave up that dream. That was always something I wanted to do. And I actually did some submissions a few times over the years, got rejected. I'd probably sent them to him. Actually, what happened was I think I drew up a strip. I had a strip and I submitted it to him. That's what it was. And he rejected it. But he said, I have a strip. We're looking for an artist for a strip that we're developing now. Are you interested? And I said, yes. the writer ended up rejecting me, but I said, hey Jay, like I've got another idea. Could I pitch it to you? So I had like an opening, and so I pitched him this idea of like doing like a strip about a family that moves to the city, and then like it's kind of a I guess I was the strip about gentrification, and he actually liked the idea. But I went upstairs and I said to my wife, hey, I just talked to Jay Kennedy, and like he wants to do the strip about gentrification. Probably didn't say that, but she said, no, what you should do is a strip about like modern family life. Like families are living this way now, like it's busy, and there's phones, and there weren't cell phones yet, but all this internet, blah blah blah. You should do a strip about that. So we drew it up and sent it to Jay, and he said, so the long story short is, he said he offered to syndicate it. And most times when a cartoonist gets syndicated, when a syndicate offers to syndicate you, what happens is you do a development period, right? And in the development period, you do your strip for like 9 months as if you were doing your daily strip. And then they decide if they're actually going to take it to market, and they pay you like $4,000 for this whole time. And, famously, like Bill Watterson did this and got rejected by, I think, United. It was either United or Universal. And then he took the strip to Universal or United, depending on which syndicate had rejected him. And then, the rest is history. So I don't know like what happened to the guy that turned him down at the first syndicate. But Jay said, you can skip the development period and we'll pay the $4,000. I was like, okay, well,
I'll take you up on that. Right.
Going to be a big success, because I heard that's what happened with Kathy. So that's what happened. And the submission actually ended up being the first month of the strip.
Wow.
There was good and bad things about that. The good thing was we got a deal really fast, and then we were off to the races. But the bad thing was the strip actually could have used some development. And I think that really hurt I think that hurt it. I mean, I think it hurt it.
What would you like to have done differently?
I would have liked to work on it more, because it wasn't ready to go to market. It wasn't developed enough. And the truth is, I don't know if it ever would have been within the time constraint, because I didn't feel like the strip was really developed for like 5 or 6 years. Like it really took a while for me to get to a place where I wanted to be with it. We never
but that would be hard if you think about it, because in order for you to get that much involved in it, so the characters in the world you have to do enough of the strip for that, because that's how it happens too. You can't like totally develop it all from edge to edge, right? With a month and a half of samples or whatever, most strips start with.
Well, I think it depends. If your strip is really about character, I think you can. Our strip was about a concept, right? So our strip was about like working from concept, modern family life. Now we have to like hang characters on that. Now we have to figure out like what the characters are going to do. Now we have to figure out like what's going to actually happen in the strip. If like, on the other hand, your strip was about, a resentful cat, if your strip was about a cat that loves to eat and is lazy, right? Then all the action in the strip, all the stories in the strip, all the gags from the strip stem from that. So that's a much stronger basis to build your strip on. And it's going to be a lot easier for people to understand. And it's going to be a lot hookier. And so we didn't really have that. We were selling a concept.
How much time was there between, hey, let's make it about a modern family, to being greenlit to being in the paper?
It was probably a couple months. It was probably like 2 or 3 months. As long as it took me to draw up the submission to write, and my wife and I did it together. We wrote the strip together. And I knew I couldn't do it all myself, every single day for an indefinite period of time. So I said, if you help me, we'll put your name on it. It'll be yours too. I knew that if her name was on it, she wouldn't like walk away. And that was that ended up being a really good thing to do. But she would help me. She would figure out like the big, so it would have like 2-week stories was generally how it was. 2-week little stories. And then like you didn't have to read the whole thing to get the story. It was like we kind of restated the premise at the beginning of the strip. And then so you didn't have to follow it every day, but there was a story arc. So she would help figure out like the big story arc. But then I would break it down into gags, you know, and write the gags. And then, you know, she would have to, you know, we would have weekly meetings where we'd like hash everything out. It was actually like, it was really hard. Like, it was like, we'd have to sit down like every single Sunday, and we did it for 15 years.
Wow. So now, and you were sending the originals in the beginning, or were you how were you delivering?
So by that time it was all by computer. So
okay.
It was all by email. I think it was all by email. They may have had a portal. I don't remember now. They may have had a portal that I had to upload stuff to.
And Terry, were you doing six days in a Sunday, or what was it?
Yeah, that's what I did. 6 days in a Sunday. Here's the originals. Show and tell.
Oh, I'll be right over, Terry.
That's a Sunday.
Nice.
You know,
that's great.
This is no, it's a Hanukkah strip.
Terry, how did you feel your style changed going from even just doing comics to doing strips? Even like
Changed a lot.
Right.
So here's Unsupervised Existence. This is the first one. So, I mean,
oh, I love it.
Can you see how cluttered and like blacks everywhere? I didn't know how to spot my blacks. Like, I didn't really know how to make figure ground work. You know, this is pretty early. I mean, my style changed in the course of doing the comic, you know, the alt comics as well. But I had a lot of underground scribbly stuff in my work still when I started doing the strip. The strip really knocked all that stuff out. And I learned to rely on my line, which I should have been doing to begin with. And I just was able to develop, you know, I finally got a style that was mine, that I'd liked, that I could do, that felt like the style I should have been doing all along.
What were you inking with at that point?
Winsor Newton #2, red sable brush.
Okay.
And that's what I used after I dropped that stupid crow quill, because I read somewhere that cartoonists ink with a brush. So I started inking with a brush. I actually started working with it in college. And I would do the brush and then go in with like crow quill and mess it up. But, you know, I would pretty much ink with a brush. And then I lettered with, I have these antique lettering pens. I bought them in an antique shop in Wisconsin. There was like a whole bunch of them. And they were the kind that, you know, like lettering pens have these, like a copper thing on top that kind of, it's got like two nibs in effect. And it kind of it goes, you know, and like the modern ones, they always get clogged up and like messed up after a while. These ones had hinges. You could like pop the copper up and like wipe the whole thing off.
Wow.
Beautiful pens. I still have a bunch of them. Yeah, and I would pencil it with Collie Race copy knot.
One thing I loved about the Edge City strips is that like you were really mastering the space of the strips, and everything felt really open and airy, and like it didn't feel cluttered, and it's like you were really just really playing with your dimensions there, and it all just felt like it fit exactly where it's supposed to go.
Well, thanks. You know, I mean, by the end, you know, I felt like we were just doing fantastic work. I mean, I was really happy with the last couple of years of the strip. Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, and it made me kind of, oh, John Rose. Thanks, John. Gosh, Snuffy Smith. Yeah, I really, you know, I wasn't sad when the strip ended because it was feeling like a dead end at that point. We never really made more than King Features guaranteed us, you know, a certain amount of money every year, no matter how the strip sold, as long as it wasn't losing money. And that's kind of how it survived, as long as it did. And we never made more than our guarantee, which was like a half a living. So I still had to do like tons of freelance work.
Do you have an idea how many strips Edge City was? I mean, how many papers Edge City was in?
Depends how you count. So Sundays are always counted different than it's like the Sundays are another paper than the dailies. And that's justified because there are a lot of papers that do just run the Sundays or the dailies. But it was probably like 20, something like that. There were some big papers. I mean, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran it its entire run.
Yeah.
And it was also in the Chicago Sun-Times.
Wow.
So we were lucky enough to, even though like even though our strip hardly appeared anywhere, we were lucky enough to live in cities its entire run. We were, lucky enough to be able to see it in the paper, which was a big motivation for keeping to do it. Because if that hadn't happened, I might have quit earlier.
I remember the announcement this is kind of like, I think it was before I knew you, but there was like the Inquirer says that Edge City is going to be, ending soon. And I was so bummed.
Oh, you knew me then.
Yeah.
Did I know you? I guess I did know you, did it? I don't know if I called you up and was like, Terry, what's up?
No, well, the hard thing about doing
that would have been nice. But you met me in 2002.
Yeah. And the hard thing about doing a strip is that most people, you would get information that I wouldn't get because you're a creator on the strip. So they have to give you some information. But I have no information on how many papers the two strips that I draw are in. And so it's sort of like you send your work out over the interwebs and then it magically appears somewhere and you go, well, they're still paying me. It's a very strange business compared to comic books because what your book is selling. You can find that information out. But it's the information on what comic strips they're selling is pretty closely guarded, and you don't have. They used to actually have people that would try to go around and sales teams supposedly and try to sell, try to get the Philly paper to pick it up, or if they're going to drop it.
Oh yeah.
You don't want to do that. We're going to run because they've always been doing that thing where they run a poll. Which one of these strips should go,
Yeah.
They were always doing it.
They have a team of salesmen. Oh, you know this.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I knew what it was. I knew how many papers it was in because we would get a statement every month.
I never got a statement. I got my check, but I did not get a statement.
Because you're work for hire.
Yeah, because I'm just a gunslinger, Yeah.
But no, it's a good thing because it was like this huge trauma every month, especially the first few years. Because what happens with new comic strips, is that they get a much bigger circulation at the start, and then papers immediately drop them. So you'll be in like a bunch of papers at the start, and then it'll just like and you'll be like, oh my god! And like the successful strips then start climbing again. They get buzz, but we didn't. But for years and years. I'd get the monthly statement and it was just awful. I'd look at it and who dropped your strip, and then you'd look at the total and it'd be like, oh my god.
Yeah. I heard that if you were in 200 strips, 200 papers, you could do pretty well.
Oh,
so you could be, if you were in 200. So if you're like Peanuts and you're in like what, or Blondie, they're in like 2,000 papers or something. Those guys are making a mint, Oh,
well, Charles Schultz was at one time one of the highest paid entertainers in the country.
Yeah, he made something like $40 million a year off of all the licensing and everything. It's just insane.
Yeah, but that wasn't all syndication.
No, that was MetLife and Dixie Cups and all kinds of stuff.
Well, Jay Kennedy told us we went out to dinner when we got syndicated. We went to New York. He said, if you last 2 years, you'll be making six figures.
But if you last 15, no.
But in all fairness, nobody predicted in 2002, what was going to happen with newspapers. Craigslist just killed everybody. Craigslist destroyed the entire newspaper industry. It destroyed the free weeklies. That Lloyd was in, and
display advertising pretty much went away.
Yeah,
replaced by cheap online ads.
Yeah, but all those papers were just supported by classifieds.
Right. Yeah,
I mean classifieds,
movie listing, movie times.
Yeah, all that stuff. It just completely went away.
I want to be conscious of time, Terry, and I'm loving talking to you. I want to get you to the future, to the present. Sorry. And it's great to see this outpouring of love about Edge City because, you need your flowers for that. I think that's important that you get that. But I want to give some people a chance to ask their questions. Steve, there's a couple of stars in the chat. You want to get to those?
Well, we have one that's pretty recent. Chuck Dillon. Hello, Chuck. Did the syndicate prevent you from changing the strip slightly to make it more enjoyable for you?
No. The syndicate, after the first year, the only time I got feedback from the syndicate was when I did something wrong. Like if I published, one time I drew a record cover, and they're like, you can't do that. It's, it's copyrighted. Or I may have actually cut it out and put it in because I wanted to be Burt Breathitt. And then, I got a call, you can't do that. And, if there was like a lesbian in there, they would they worried about that. I mean, it was like something, something that otherwise I never heard from them. I never heard from anybody. It was like, I told people it was like being on methadone. Yes.
Yeah. You usually only
cartoonists, I draw cartoons every day, but it's like, they just go out in a void. Like I never hear from anybody. Like, it's like,
if you hear, it's because there's a problem. Like, it's late or there's a typo or that's usually the only time you hear from them. Which, according to Tony, who writes The Phantom, says that's really kind of how the newspaper culture is. Comic strips, he always says, is much more like regular newspaper culture, which is where he came from. So it's not like regular comic culture. It's a very different culture. Editorially, it's very different, and in our era coming in, the syndicates were constantly getting smaller and shedding staff and, the art staff and all the stuff that they used to have in the old days. They don't have it all anymore, really.
No, it's all gone.
But the one thing that I think that you mentioned that I know is very true is when you do something that long, it helps you really sort of get your shit together, like get your formula, get your work day together, get your work life together, get your technique together. I mean, that's one real benefit about doing something like a comic strip.
Well, and also I just, I like the structure. I liked, having that thing to do every week. I liked always having to have a cartoon to do. And I mean, it fits my mentality. I mean, I was really suited to do it. If I was making money, I would have been happy to keep doing it.
So how many days a week did it take you to do the strip?
I mean, I would work on it every day, but like half a day I could do it in like 3 days. Cause when we would go away on vacation, I would do 2 strips ahead. So if I was going on vacation and not doing the strip that week, I would have to do 2 weeks or, I'd have to get ahead. So I could do 2 strips in a week, and that's about all I could handle. But, it took like half my day,
And you never had assistants or anything like that? You did everything yourself?
Oh, no. Who am I going to what? Except my wife. I mean, no. I never had assistants. No. I've never had assistants at all. Jamar can have assistants. Me, I'm just like grubbing in the dirt over here. I got,
I'll come over and help you too.
Aw, that's okay. You're way too.
Steve, you want to get this last?
Yeah, we got one more. We've kind of been weaving them. Jamar's been master of the segue has been weaving them into the conversation.
And you know what? Before I go, like I got to plug my book. So
That's what I'm trying to get it in. I'm trying to get it in. Yeah.
Terry, is there a writer artist that you happen to be following at the moment? The question coming from Joseph over on YouTube.
That's a good question.
JAMAR Nicholas.
Yeah, JAMAR Nicholas. Who else is there? Not so much. I've been reading. I do pay attention to middle grade graphic novels because that's kind of what I've done and I'm trying to do more of these days. So, and there are, a lot of those people I really like, like Jamar stuff. I like, Raina Tegelmeier's great. And Terry LaBan's really amazing. And who else? See, the problem with getting old is that I can never remember the things that I want to remember when I want to remember them. But I wouldn't say there's somebody that I'm just really involved with at the moment. I feel like I exist on this vast heap of influences, that I've seen over the years, and it's all, I can't even name them. There's just so many. But last year I went to the Mad Magazine show in where was it? It was in Massachusetts.
The Rockwell Museum.
Yeah, at the Rockwell Museum. Did you see that?
No.
And I was kind of like, Mad Magazine. I've seen all that stuff. Like, I've seen it. What do you want? But being in the presence of those pages was like, I was not prepared for that.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Everybody's looking at the man like weeping. Before. The Jack Davis.
Yeah, I was thinking anything by Jack Davis would just break my heart.
I mean, when you see that stuff, they had the front page of the High Noon satire. That first page, which I think is maybe one of the best first panels in comics, and it was just like, I mean, you can't believe such a thing exists. I mean, you can't, just stand before it. It's just, so I wasn't prepared for that, Yeah. Well, maybe so. There was a lot of people there, so maybe we did cross paths. I don't know. Did you see somebody crying?
Well, thank you for that question, Joseph. Appreciate it.
Terry, before so maybe just to wrap up the Edge City. So when was the moment where you were like, yeah, we gotta cut its throat. We gotta cut the throat on this and tell the syndicate. Or was
the contract was for 15 years. So in 2015, I went to the NCS convention in Washington, and Brendan Burford, who was my editor, was there.
Wow.
And I sat down with Brendan. I said, "So, Brendan," he was like, "Yeah." They had renewed it. They could have canceled it at 10 years, but they kept it going for another 5, which I'm really happy about because that was our best 5 years. But he was like, "Yeah, we can't keep Edge City going anymore." And I was like, "Yeah, it's fine." I mean, how long am I going to ride this thing? I mean, it's not. It's the road to nowhere. Am I just going to keep doing it till I'm too old to do anything else? I mean, because I'm afraid to quit. I mean, it was just like,
right.
It was time to move on, and I'd been feeling trapped for a long time. But it's so hard to give up something like that when it's in the paper. Like I saw it in the paper every day.
Right. Were there collections?
There's one. After the first 3 or 4 years, we did a collection, but that was the only one, which is really too bad because the last 5 years are the best. But
well, let's before we talk about your new graphic novel, and I want to talk about your visual stuff, and also I want to talk about the NCS. So, how did you get involved in that? Was that something you kind of got jumped into? The NCS.
The NCS?
Yeah.
Well, I always wanted to be in the NCS. I wanted to play golf with Mort Walker and I saw pictures of those guys in their tuxedos. I was like, I want to stand with Ernie Bushmiller at the bar and talk like Nancy. And, that was kind of a fantasy. The funny thing is that when I got syndicated, I asked about the NCS, and at that time you had it was a big, thing to get in. You had to get a sponsor, and Jay Kennedy, who was involved with the NCS. I mean, King Features, paid for a buffet. So, Jay Kennedy was my sponsor, and there was like somebody objected to me being in the NCS. It was the guy that did Soup to Nuts. What's that guy's name? Rick, not that guy. What Rick? Who's that guy's name? What the Soup to Nuts guy? He was a president for a while.
He objected.
Yeah, so apparently not to me personally, but he was like, "Well, he just got syndicated. Like, what if his syndication ends? Then what? We're going to be like stuck with this loser in the NCS." And so one day, I was like, like what, like WTF, man? I'm like, if I don't qualify for the NCS, I'm a syndicated cartoonist. I've been a cartoonist for 20 years, And then like one day when this is all happening, my phone rings. I pick it up. This guy goes, "Hi, this is Mort Walker." And I was like, "Oh shit, Mort Walker." And he goes, "I heard what's going on, and I just want you to know that, like, I think you should be in the NCS, And it was Rick. Yeah, that's it, Rick Stromowski. I think it's Rick Stromowski. Yeah. And I was like, it was just really weird. It was like, wow, thanks, Mort. Like, and then I got into the NCS.
Well, I say this a lot, and it's not a secret. It's that almost every cartoonist has some sort of story with the NCS. Maybe it was the old guard, and somebody like Johnny Hart said, "Go kick rocks," or something like that. But it's that was then. But it's a lot different now.
Yes,
well, if they didn't change, they would go extinct.
Oh.
I mean, really. If you don't bring in new blood, the old blood eventually just sort of thins out.
Yeah.
Listen, it's better. I mean, it took me a long time to warm up to the NCS. Like, I kind of thought it was going to be like San Diego, and like it was not that. I mean,
right.
I used to joke that the NCS looked like the Tea Party. I mean, it was like, like all these like
powdered wigs.
All these aging white guys, and in the room, and it was like. And it was a weird, I don't know. It took me a while to sort of figure it out. But, hanging out with people in Philly was like a really, like getting to know Dave and Tom, and you weren't in then, but, just, and Mark Tatuli. I really like those guys. I mean, I like cartoonists, and I always seek out like gatherings of cartoonists, because if you don't seek out gatherings of cartoonists, like you will never meet a cartoonist. I mean, you don't just run into cartoonists like at, cocktail parties randomly. I mean, it's a pretty rare thing, to do. So, I like hanging out with cartoonists. I mean, and I've always had like regular groups, and, lunch in Chicago, and there's stuff in Philly. And, so I like that kind of thing. And I want to do it, but, it took me, like, the NCS culturally was just a really strange, because I'm used to like all the things I was always involved with were kind of fringy things.
Right. But it's funny you say that, because I've always felt, at least probably up until maybe like 10 years ago, there was definitely demarcations within the industry, because you had the strip guys who kind of looked down on the comic book guys, and then when the comic book guys, you had like the indie or underground or whatever you wanted to call it, and then the mainstream guys, and there was like a little, there was a few people who could kind of go between the two, which I always found kind of weird, because to me there's either like good cartooning or bad cartooning, and it doesn't matter if it's like Barney Google or the Fantastic Four or Robert Crumb or Robert Rodriguez or Kahan Wilson or Robert Crumb or the European guys, because I liked all that stuff as a kid. I still today, I love all that stuff. But I would sometimes, when I would see some of the underground guys, they kind of have it'd be a little bit of an attitude, they were, and I always just felt that was like weird to me. It's like either you're a cartoonist, and it doesn't matter what you draw, whether you draw Wonder Warthog or you draw Nancy or you draw Prince Valiant. But there was definitely, I think, the further back you go, there was more of a cliquishness.
Well, I mean, that's not surprising. I mean, comic strips were like Hollywood, and comic books were like, Hoboken. I mean, it was like, you know, I mean, these are very separate worlds. I mean, comic strips traditionally, what was comic strips was a very, very different world than comic books, you know, and they each had their own, I think comic books more, but you know, they each had their own thing, you know, and people that were involved with comics. Like when I was involved with comics, those people totally didn't pay attention to strips. Like, not much.
Well, this generation, I think the older generation, you know, the Joe Kuberts and the Neil Adams, and the further back you go, those guys were influenced by the strips and they wanted to do the strip. That was the thing you were trying to move up. And, you know, a lot of those guys were trying to do strips or did strips. You know?
Right. Right. I mean, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, or really the 50s, 60s, 50s through the 70s, if you drew comic books, you were a loser. I mean, it was the wider culture held, you know, looked down on comics. I mean, it was something that, you know, you didn't want to end up doing if you were a serious artist. You didn't want to end up drawing comic books. I mean, I'm not saying I felt that way, but culturally it was, you know, something that happened in the basement. Strips were like the big money. Strips were like the big entertainment.
Strips were adults.
Strips were for, you know, adults, not in that way, but like, you know, you know, strips dominated the culture. I mean, you know, people paid attention to Peanuts. People didn't pay attention to the Silver Surfer, except, you know, in dirty little comic stores, you know, in the basements of like
now
rundown areas
where the Silver Surfer is.
Now it's completely flipped. You know, now comic strips are completely off the map. I mean, you know, I used to go, you know, 15 years ago, I was getting a master's degree. I would be in, you know, at now it's Jefferson University. Then it was Philadelphia University. And sometimes when we introduce ourselves at the beginning of the class, I was already the oldest person in the class usually by then. But, you know, say something about yourself. What do you do? I would say, yeah, I do a comic strip that appears in the Philadelphia Choir. Has anybody seen it? Nobody ever had seen it. Nobody ever had seen the comics. Nobody ever read the comics and nobody ever read the newspaper. And this was like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That's, you know, in the 90s, everybody read newspaper comics. You know, everybody read Calvin and Hobbes and they read, you know,
Bloom County and Far Side.
And Far Side. Those were the big three. But Garfield and Dilbert, everybody had, you know, little figures. Everybody, it was part of the daily pop culture conversation. And that's,
well, one of the things I noticed, but we've talked about it on the podcast before, because I've been teaching long enough, that generation, the last generation of kids who went through reading Calvin and Hobbes, or whose parents read Calvin and Hobbes and bought them to collections, has passed through now. So now you're getting 20-year-olds who might have heard of it but never read it.
Really? Because it's my impression that kids are still reading it in the paperback collection.
Nah, you know, I would always ask the students at the beginning of every semester, well, you know, what do you read? What do you like? You know, and it was less and less and less and less, because the kids coming along now are getting stuff on the computer, not in the bookstore necessarily. But what will happen is the Dogman kids, the Captain Underpants, then the Dogman kids will be the next generation of people who might be regular readers. But there was a disconnection there, I think, you know.
All right, I'm gonna put a pin in this before we run out of time. Terry, you have to talk about your graphic novel.
Yeah, so I want to plug my book here because, you know, why else?
Yeah, that's why you're here.
So this is my new graphic novel. It came out. It's still new. It came out in December. Mendel the Mess Up, middle grade graphic novel, and how can I open it up? Full color, historical graphic novel. Starred reviews in Publishers Weekly and Booklist.
That's awesome.
In the National Jewish Book Award, and widely available. At least I hope it's widely available. And I urge you to pick it up. This is by far the longest book I've ever written. I had collections of my stuff out before that had been printed in other, you know, formats, the strip comics. This is the first book that I've actually written as a book. Hopefully not the last. So
So how did you go about, what was the germ of that idea, and how did you go about pitching it to your publisher?
Oh gosh. Well, you know, the germ of it was I've wanted to do a middle grade graphic novel for a long time. I was attracted to the form after years of not wanting. I couldn't conceive of doing stuff for kids, but at some point that kind of flipped. And I realized that kids were the only one. Not only, you know, is the kids market the best comics market right now, but that kids were reading like the kind of books that we wanted to make back in the alt days. Like, you can do all these different kinds of comics and stories now that are completely not, you know, superhero comics, have nothing to do with all that. And there's a market for them, you know, like you can actually, like, it's actually a commercially viable market. There's this massive audience and they're in demand. So I really wanted to get involved with that. And, you know, I thought of a bunch of ideas and they all made submissions out of them and they all ended up in drawers. And this one, you know, sometimes I just try to think of stuff. And I think at some point this idea popped into my head of the sentence, you know, and the sentence was how my grandpa whipped the Cossacks. And I thought that would be, I like that sentence. That would be a good story, but like I didn't have a story. I kind of put it away. I didn't deal with it for a long time. And then I pulled it out again and started thinking about it. And I thought, oh, you know, maybe I can make a book out of this. And I started trying to think of what that story would be. So that's how it started. And finding a publisher and getting it published was like a long journey. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of happenstance involved. A lot of synergy, I guess. Conversations with people that led to different things, and
so
which is a recurring theme throughout your career.
Yeah.
And what did your pitch consist of? Because I mean, did you study that and say, okay, I know I got to have a synopsis and so many pages done and so many pages, you know, what was your pitch?
Yeah, I talked to, you know, who told me, Mark Tatuli, who's done a bunch of middle grade graphic novels. And I asked him, what do I need to do this? Mm-hmm. And he basically said, you need a synopsis, maybe character descriptions. You need 10 to 20 finished pages. And he had 60 penciled pages, right? So 10 to 20 finished pages so they can see what your style looks like, plus a cover, right? And then 40 more pages that are penciled.
I'm just nodding because, like, yep.
Yeah. So that's what I did.
Yeah,
that's what I did.
And you know, talking to comic book guys, and they ask questions like that, and I say the same thing to them, and they go, "Wait, how many pages?"
But you know, it's fine because. Yeah. Like, you want to know if your idea will work at all. Like, is it like, can I make a book out of this? And B, you want to do enough. You got to do enough to give them an idea of what it's going to be. And like 10 pages just isn't enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not. But yeah, and also, this is like one of the newest thing that's on your plate. I just want to know, because we've jumped through all of these kind of like quantum leap gaps of cartooning over the years. How do you feel this new kind of traditional book market that you're in is different from the other things you've done?
Well, one thing I'm realizing is, you know, I want to be like you. I want like a 3-book deal, you know, so I have something to do for like the next, you know, 10 years. Yeah. You know, this book's really a one-off. So one thing about it is there's a lot of waiting, you know, as opposed to work. Like, I really want to draw. I want to draw, you know, and so, and that's another reason doing the synopsis and all that stuff, doing the proposal, I kind of like, because I like to draw. I want to do the work, you know, but there's just a lot of waiting. So like, I have another proposal in with my agent now, and it's just like, you know, I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And then if he gets me a deal, then I'll wait some more to get a contract. And then, you know, I'll wait like another 6 months. So, you know, it's going to be like a year before I can start actually working on the book. and then I'll work on the book for a year and a half, and then I'll be done with the book. And then if I don't have a book lined up, I'll sit and wait some more. So I'm actually like working on another book proposal because I just can't, I can't stop doing it. Plus, like, I'm worried I'm running out of time anyway. So, that's the thing. Because, once I got Edge City, it was just like, oh, okay, for the next 15 years, you're going to do a comic strip every, a week's worth of comic strips every week. So I'm working. When I did my comics, it was like, as soon as I finished my comic, they're ready to do another one. So I'd start working on another one. So the big gaps are the biggest difference, I think.
Well, Terry, we're out of time. We
had a good run though.
We straight talk for 2 hours almost.
I can talk more. What?
I know, but I gotta walk the dog, brother. And we missed some stuff. I would love to have you back on. And this, I feel like we just scratched the surface on all of this.
I'm not let people get sick of me.
Oh no, we can never get sick of you. So we've been flashing your URL across the screen all evening. Do you have any other places you would like people to order Mendel from, or like support indie bookstores, or any local things, or anything you'd like to plug?
Well, sure. If you can find it at your local indie bookstore, order it from there. That's always a good thing. The link on the website goes directly to Holiday House. So, and I think they have some recommendations.
They do. They have Bookshop and IndieBound.
Yeah. You never want to plug Amazon, but I buy stuff from Amazon. So,
yeah.
Just buy it. I don't, the important thing is that you buy it, not that, where you get it from, but, it's always good to do the more socially responsible thing. And I support that.
Yeah.
But, if you got to do it on Amazon and you just have no choice, I think that's fine. Don't beat yourself up.
Yeah. Just buy it. And,
Jeff Bezos, he's going to make money off you anyways. So
George Gant says, great one tonight, fellas. Chuck Dillon says, A++++. I
love you guys. You guys are my heroes. I can't believe you're listening.
Oh my goodness. We always have superstars up in the chat. But you, sir, were the star of the evening. Thank you, Terry LaBan. Guys, we're out of time.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Don't leave. We're going to do our outro. So what else is going on? And let's see, Terry, going to have you back. The Frogurt is also cursed. That's also a thing. And I think that's my little slip I like to throw in there. Oh, thank you, Bill.
And I want to say that this Saturday,
at
4 in the afternoon, I will be doing a live drawing, like a live cast. Me and a bunch of other cartoonists will be drawing live. We'll be doing sketches that people may purchase, or you can just tune in and watch us draw. And so you can check that out on my Instagram or my Facebook. I will actually give people I will post the link so they can tune in and watch us draw.
Oh, that's cool, Mike. And when is it again? On Saturday?
This Saturday.
Oh, very cool. Look at that. Everybody's so busy. I love it. See, what are you doing? I'm gonna put you on
Nothing. Just sitting on my hands.
I will be back here tomorrow evening for Coffee Break with Jay and Terry. You're gonna love the Coffee Break this week. You gotta tune in. 9 p.m. EST, right back here on the Pencil channel. And our guest for next week, we don't know, but we'll let you know as soon as we find out, and you'll be the first to know. Guys, want to let Terry go pee? Let's get out of here, guys. We're at the end game. You saw Cumberbatch said it in that movie. We're at the end game now. But I would behoove you before we go into that cold, dark night to wash those curvy hands. Terry, put your curvy hands up. Yeah, there you go.
I don't know what Peanut's hands are. Charlie Brown hands are. I don't know what those would be.
There's like 3 nubs hanging out this.
Peanuts grass.
You gotta bend them a little bit.
So. Yeah, a little bit too.
Yeah.
All right.
Or disco hands. There you go.
Straight. Yeah.
All right, guys. Have a great night. We'll see you next
All
time.
right.
Thanks.
Thanks.